Hey, and welcome back to the third-person camera tutorials in Unity. In this lesson, we're going to be extending our camera from this targeting behavior that we have here. We're going to add one more behavior. It's a first-person mode. So in Wind Waker, you're able to press up on the C stick, or I guess really the right thumbstick, and look around the world and just kind of observe your surroundings and ascertain, I guess, what you need to do in the game. So we're going to go ahead and implement that in our game. But first, if you're wondering, it looks a little different. I just added a Bloom script and a ambient occlusion script because that's what all the cool games do these days. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go back into our camera script and we're gonna start adding stuff to it. And the first thing we're gonna add is it's not any logic, but it's just a struct, which is just really a collection of values that we're going to store our camera position in for when we actually want to do this first person behavior. So we'll save that. We'll have a look at this. So we've got a position where we're actually going to align the camera to, a transform, which is just going to be where we're going to place the game object, and then we're going to have an initializer function where we're going to parent it. So the basic idea is we're going to have our character here. In the hierarchy, we're going to take the character's base hierarchy, and we're just going to place an object right around here, like right in front of the character's face. And then that way we'll have something to align our camera to when we go into this mode. So next thing is we need to go ahead and create that variable. And what we're going to do is we're going to call it the first person transform. And we're going to initialize it in the start method. So in the start method, we're going to add a new initializer. We're going to say first person camera position equals new camera position. So we're going to declare a new one of these objects. And we're going to store within it, we're going to put it at this position, which is 1.6 meters up from the base of the character. And we're going to create a new object, a new game object. We're going to assign its transform to that transform variable here, so we have a way to manipulate it. And we're going to say that the parent is just the parent of our character. So we're just going to parent it to the character's main transform. So that's pretty simple. And we need to put this variable up at the top of our script. So just take the variable and add it to our private variable section, save, and let's make sure that that compiles. Okay, so we've got an error. So we don't actually have a reference to our follow yet. So the best way to do that is we're just going to pass in follow xform here, which is the name of our transform. Okay, that seemed to do it, and let's make sure that that worked. Perfect. So you can see right here, we just created that camera. We gave it a name, first person camera, which is just what it was declared as here, and it's 1.6 meters up from the character. And it's great because as we move around, it sits in front of the character's face. So that's where we're going to try to position our camera. So next, let's create a new camera state. And we're going to have some logic for moving into this first-person camera mode. And since we want to use the right stick to know when to go into this mode, we're going to need to pull in values for the right stick. So in our update method, our lid update method, we need to pull in values for right X and right Y, but we also need left X and left Y because we're going to be using the right stick to move into that mode. We're going to be using the left stick to control the camera while we're in it. Okay, perfect. So let's save this. And you'll notice if we play the game now, it's going to say that we don't have... Oh, it actually doesn't give us a warning. But it's because I've already changed it. If you just go to the input manager, we need to actually create new inputs for this right X and right Y variable. So if you have a look at the Xbox controller setup, which is right here, you'll notice that the stick is axes 5 and 4. So I've just placed 5 and 4 in here and set the gravity, the dead zone, and the sensitivity to 1.1 and 1. So that's all there is to do for that. And now we've got our values for these axes. Let's add the logic in now to determine when we actually want to enter this state. So we'll say if I'll go ahead and paste this in here. So if the right Y, if this stick goes higher than some threshold and the state is not We don't have this camera state yet, so we'll delete this. If the character's not moving and we've pushed the right Y stick up, then we want to enter this first person camera state. So we need this first person threshold variable. And we're just going to set that to something that the user can set as a serialized variable in the inspector. So place that there. We're missing a couple more variables that are used in this. We don't have an x-axis rotation yet. And what that's going to be is as the character is looking, we need to store some variable for this up and down. I know it looks like he's looking up and down, but if you think about it, in Unity, the axes are like, if you look at the axes, the x-axis is the one that is being turned on. So we'd be actually turning, sort of like if you think of this controller as turning on its x-axis, x-axis is looking up and down. So we want to store the amount of x rotation that we've achieved so far. So we're going to store that in a variable. And we also want to make the character's head look up and down. So as he's looking, we want to actually move the character's head using some variables in Mechanim. So let's add those two variables too. And save, and hopefully we won't get any errors. Okay, so we need one more thing. So we need actually a reference now to the controller script, which is a little bad because it makes our scripts a little more tightly coupled. But in this case, it's okay because we don't ever want to have a third-person camera without a character controller logic. So we're going to add a new variable up here at the top, and we're going to make it serialized. And we're going to make a private character controller logic. Just call it follow. And it's pretty easy to get this. All we have to do is just use this tag again. So we'll just grab the tag. And that should do it. For follow transform, we just grab the player's transform. For follow the regular object, we just grab the character controller logic component. So hopefully that'll do us. Okay, great. We want to add one more thing in this sort of decision section of our script where we're trying to decide what camera state we want to go into. And that is, we need to add a state now. We need to add logic for when we want to go into the behind the back mode. Because now we have two modes that aren't the targeting mode. And the logic for this one's pretty simple as well. If the camera state isn't first person and we haven't exited first person yet, so we need to add this into our input as well. This exit button is basically just a button to exit out of the mode. You can target to get out of the first person mode, but you also want to be able to hit B to get out of the first person mode. So here we can hit B and exit this mode. We want to add a button for that too. So we're going to call it exit first person view, and we're just going to set it to the joystick button 1. Which here is the B button on the Xbox controller. And you can go ahead and leave all the sensitivity and gravity the same. So if we're in first person and we've exited first person, or we're in targeting and the targeting button is less than the threshold, we want to move into the camera state that's the behind camera state. So let's save that. Hopefully we don't get any errors. Okay, so targeting threshold, we need to create a variable for that. That we're going to set probably to 0.01 is a good value. And we just want to copy that into our variables up at the top. So that's just a constant. Okay, looks like it compiled. Just as a test, let's make sure that we're getting into the right mode. We can just set so we've got this camera state first person. Let's just create a new case in our switch statement for that particular state. And let's just add a debug statement just so we know that we actually managed to get into this state properly. So we'll see how that works. Go ahead and hit play. So if we press up on the stick, we've entered the first person mode, and you can see that in the log down here. If we trigger, we're not in the first person mode anymore. You can see that we're not getting this anymore. We can have a look there. And also if we enter the first person mode by pressing the stick up and then pressing B, we've now exited the first person mode, and it's not running that debug statement anymore. So it looks like our logic is pretty sound for that. Now that we know that the mode is working properly, the thing we want to do next is to actually make the character look up and down. So to do that, we're going to need to grab a variable from the character, which is the look at. We need to create a new variable called look at weight, and that's going to be how the character is looking using mechanim, because mechanim you can have access to the character's neck and manipulate the head and move it up and down. So let's add a new local variable. We'll call it look weight. And we're gonna want to set that to 0 if we're in the first person mode. Oh, we've already actually created it, so we don't need to create it again. But we want to set it equal. We want to actually set this on update. So we're gonna grab the follow object, which is our character controller. We want to grab its animator. We want to actually set the character's look weight to this value. The thing is, we need to actually have the animator be a public property, which we haven't done yet. So we'll copy that in here. So that's good. And now let's make sure that that compiles. Nice. We need to actually set a value for that look weight now. We're going to be doing that in the first person. So the first thing we want to do is have logic for looking up and down, and then later we'll go back and add logic in for actually moving the character on its y-axis. So we'll work on the x-axis first. This is a lot of code I'm about to copy in, but I'll be sure to explain it. So this is the logic for looking up and down. Basically what we want to do is we want to calculate the amount that we want to rotate on the x-axis by taking the left stick, multiplying it by, I just multiplied it by a half because it feels a little better if it's a little smaller of a value. And we want to multiply that by the first person look speed, which is a new variable we need to add to our script. And that's just going to be how fast we want the character to actually look. So if we go back to Unity and compile, it looks like we're missing this variable as well. And this is a clamp value that we need to set so that we can't look more than a certain degrees up and down. Because you don't want to look too far to your feet, you don't want to look too far backwards, or else you'd snap the character's neck, which is definitely not a good thing. So let's grab this variable and we'll add a clamp value. We want to make this serialized so people can change it. And that should be good. Let's move this up into the serialized section too. Okay, great. So now we've got the x-axis rotation, and we're calculating it. Actually, it's probably smarter just not to use this half value. I don't know why. That's not great to put constants in there. We can just make this a little bit smaller of a value. So make it 1.5. So we'll make that. We'll make the x-axis rotation, the left y stick plus some speed, and we're going to clamp that value between x and y for our clamp values. And this isn't really x and y, it's just a convenient way of giving it two values. It's not representative of direction. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to set the first person cam's position. That transform, we want to set its rotation equal to that new rotation value. Let's actually comment out these lines for a second just so you can see the effect of that. Okay, so let's enter the first person mode. You can't actually see it yet, but I think we're in it. And if we press on the Y stick, oh, it's going to be a little tricky to do. Hold on one second. want to set this follow mode back on. It'll be useful for what we're doing here. So let's have a look at the first person camera. Move into first person mode, and you can see as we move up and down on the stick, that transform moves. So that's exactly what we wanted. We just want to point this transform up and down. It doesn't work how we want it yet, just because we haven't actually put the logic in to translate this onto the character's face. So how can we move that rotation from that game object onto the actual rotation of the camera? I think if you remember from the character controller, we used this method called from to rotation for quaternions, and then we made that give us a referential shift, just some sort of reference from one rotation to another, how far it's changed, and then we were able to use the quaternion multiplication to sort of concatenate these two rotations together. Well, that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to take this, we're going to create a shift by using the forward transform of the camera and the forward transform of this rotational game object that we have here. So we want to translate this thing's rotation, and we want to sort of reference how much that's rotated and store that onto our camera's rotation. So we'll get the same shift and then just use quaternion multiplication to put that onto the camera. So let's give that a shot now. It should move the camera as well. So we'll enter the first person mode by just tapping up on the stick. And let's see, where's our character? There we go. So the reason it's not moving it yet is because we have this look at function that's already positioning the camera and sort of overriding this rotation that we're setting here. So we're going to have to add some logic to store a new variable, and we're going to have to look at something else. So this is a little tricky here. It was kind of hard to figure out how to do this, but we basically just need to create a new vector3 to look at. So we'll call this vector3. We're just going to call it look at, just a nice simple name. And let's default that value to just be the character's offset, because that's normally what we're looking at. For both of these two cases, we're looking at the character offset, so let's go ahead and just default it there, and then we're going to only change it if we need to. What do we want to change it to in the first person is a little unintuitive. We want to do some blending here. So we want to use vector3 lerp to choose our different targets. And what we're lerping between, this is linear interpolation if you don't remember. We're basically just going to look between, we want to look between when the distance, we want to use distance as our value for lerp. When the distance between the transform positions, so this is the distance between the camera and the first person transform. So that would be the distance from this camera object to the first person transform, which you can't see because we haven't entered play mode yet, but it's the distance between here and here. So that's the distance we want to lerp on. If it's closer to the character's face, we want to make the look at the normal, if the distance is small, we want to make the look at basically just the transform of the camera plus the forward of the transform. So that's just saying, it's a pretty simple way of saying, take the camera and look along its z-axis. That's its forward axis. So just let me move to the camera. It's like saying, take the camera and then look +1 in the z-axis. So it's basically just looking forward is the idea there. And if it's further away, so anything greater than 0, we just want to make our look at still be the character's head. So let's save that. Or sorry, the character's offset, which is just our normal look at behavior. So we're storing a new look at here. So it's still not quite working, and the reason for that is we haven't actually moved the camera's target position yet. So right now it's basically just still sitting behind the character. We really want it to be where that first person transform is. So add one more line, and we're just going to set the target position equal to the position of that first person camera, that game object we created. So now when we press up on the stick, The other thing we need to do is, since we're setting a new target position here, we're going to be overriding it here. So we need to actually put this logic back into these two cases of the switch statement. So we'll just copy this line of code here, and just, actually we need to cut the line of code, and just paste it into the targeting behavior. And we want to paste it into the behind camera mode. Oh, we're actually already setting it in the behind camera, so we don't need to worry about it there. So hopefully this will work. Let's give this a quick test and see if it works. Okay, so it compiled. Let's hit play. Perfect, so we actually move into that first person camera now. So we're back in Unity right now, and let's press forward on the stick. And it looks like we can look up and down properly. So this is good, but the problem is we can still run around while we're doing this. And that definitely creates a lot of weird behavior. So let's go and add a case into our character controller that says if we're not in this first person view, we should not, if we are in the first person view, we shouldn't move the character at all. So we'll add a case to if animator and if the camera state is not equal to the first person. So we have reference to the game cam, and we have reference to cam state. We need to make sure that that's a public function or public property though. It is not. So let's create that as a property. In MonoDevelop, it's super easy to do. You can just right click and say refactor, and then just choose encapsulate. We only really need to read this field, so we shouldn't give more access to the character controller than is necessary. So we'll just do that. And this should now prevent it from running the character forward when we hit up on that stick. So now we can just look up and down, and that's good. Problem is we can look all the way into our body, which is a little weird. So the way we're going to fix that is just set our limit to, I think 60 is probably a good number. So we'll set that limit. You'll be able to see how that clamp works. So now we're clamped to these values. So if you look in the code for the third person camera, we have this first person local rotation is clamped between these two values. And that's how we're getting this behavior of not being able to look too far. So we're almost there, but if you look at our character, he is not facing his head. So when he's looking, it's just kind of his head is sitting there statically, which is a little weird. So we want to actually move the character's neck up and down, which is actually really easy to do. Without Mechanim, this would be incredibly hard, but Mechanim makes it one line of code. Okay, I guess it's technically two, but that's fine. So we're just going to move the character's model head by grabbing the animator component and setting the lookout rotation to look at the first person camera's position plus its forward vector. So that's the same idea as we had here, where we're taking the camera's position and the forward vector. We just want to look along that first person object and just make sure that the character's head is facing it. So let's turn off the scene view follower and zoom in here. So we're grabbing this position and we're looking along this vector. So let's enter first person. And it doesn't look like it's working quite yet. Let's see what's wrong there. So we're setting look weight, which is good. There must be something wrong. So now that we've set this look at position and look weight, if we go back into the play view, we can go into first person mode and then look up and down, and as you can see, the character's head is actually looking at that direction. So that's a really nice effect. We still don't have the ability to look left and right yet, so how we're going to add that is just pretty similar to how we moved the character in the character controller script. In fixed update, we were rotating the character using this delta rotation. So we're going to do the same kind of thing here. And just right after we move the character's head, we're just going to look left and right. So this is a pretty simple idea. we're going to make a rotation amount, and we're going to set that equal to the rotation degrees per second, which, let's make sure we set this variable. So we need to grab that variable and add that to our serialized list. So based on this rotation degrees per second, we want to make that as a vector 3 with no movement in the x value, and we want to make it so that we rotate the character from 0 degrees based on whether the stick is moving left or right. We want to make this rotation degrees per second positive or negative, and we want to have z be 0 as well. So we're rotating between no rotation and positive rotation or negative rotation based on the left stick. And we have to do absolute value of the stick because otherwise the lerp won't work correctly. Lerp doesn't really work with negative values. So we'll take this rotation amount and we'll create a Quaternion rotation out of the Euler rotation, and then we're going to apply that using Quaternion multiplication into our follow transforms rotation. So if we save this, we should be able to see our character rotate around. Let's hit play. We'll go into first person mode. We can look up and down, and now we can also look left and right by rotating our character. So that's pretty good. If you notice, after we start running, the character's head doesn't reset its look. It's still looking at where the camera used to be, which is kind of weird, so we probably need to fix that. Looks kind of like some Exorcist stuff going on there. So the way we're going to fix that is create a reset camera method that we're going to call whenever we're not in the first person mode. Basically, that's just going to set the look weight equal to 0 and reset the rotation of our camera. And we just want to call this method whenever we're in the behind camera state, whenever we're in the targeting camera state. So it compiled. We need to replay just because sometimes Unity doesn't work well if you change the script in play mode. So we can look up, look around, and when we go back to our run mode, our character is no longer looking at that target, which is what we wanted. So we want to add a little bit of polish to this now. We've got the basics in there, but if our character is sort of tilted to the side or facing the camera, and we go into first person mode, it's a little disorienting the way that the camera moves around. We want to have it smoothly transition into that, both in the it can come down nicely, but you see it sort of tilts down, which is not so nice, and also if you're to the side, it doesn't really rotate into place very well. So we need to polish that up. The way that we're going to do that is another lerp, and we're going to change the look at again. And I've added a bunch of debug rays in here just so you can get a good idea of what's actually happening. So the idea here is we want to take our look at, and we want to lerp between the target position and the forward vector. So that's basically just saying where the camera wants to go plus looking forward, which is usually, which just basically means when we're in play mode that's just this state here, because we're looking along the target position and we're looking in the forward direction. So we want to lerp between that and a second value, which is the value of the transform position, which is our camera, plus the transforms forward. So that's just looking along the camera's axis. And we're going to lerp based on time delta time. And I've colored these vectors, this look at vector black, and you'll be able to see the first value, this first part of the lerp, in white, and the second value in blue, or it's really cyan. So let's have a look at that real fast. We'll zoom the camera out just so it's easier to see. And let's enter first person mode. So you can see the blue and the white vector. The blue vector is looking along that's looking here, looking on this line of code right here, looking along the first person transform. and the white is looking along the camera transform. So as we move into this is going to only run from like 0 to 1 and then just keep going and increasing. So it's effectively just creating a smooth transition from looking forward at the camera, which is what our normal behavior is as we run around, to the behavior that we want when we enter the first person mode, which is actually looking along the first person transform. So the idea there is just we want to have it so that when we're here, we kind of smoothly transition in from the side, which is a lot nicer. It just feels a lot better. So that about does it for the first person mode tutorial, and I think that we're going to work next time on perhaps polishing just the script up a little bit and making turning a little bit nicer and adding some nice animations into this.